as members of the First City Council and a member of the Local Government Study Commission, and looking back, understanding that there are some political compromises that go into this kind of thing, what would you think now would be the most important thing that you would like to have done differently? The biggest mistake, if you will, of the new government? That's structurally, is there something that you would, I mean, I think one of the things that's being discussed now is whether elections should be spring elections, standalone city elections, or whether they should be tacked on to state elections and national elections. An idea that might save $2 or $3 million. But and there's the discussion about whether city council should have been staggered terms rather than all 19 being elected at the same time.
Well, I've been anticipating that question. And I would suggest something substantially more controversial.
Okay.
And that is whether the mayor should appoint the sheriff, or whether the sheriff should continue to be elected as an outsider from the...
That was a major compromise.
Well,
to have an elected
sheriff. That was
sheriff.
an essential compromise because you could not have made it without Dale Carson. And fortunately, we had a mayor in place, Hans Stansler, who was not that territorial.
Homer and Don, what do you think?
I think, well, one of the things, with respect to the sheriff, I think it took that in order for us to get Consolidated approved. Another such thing was leaving out the 3 beaches, Atlanta Beach, Neptune Beach, Jacksonville Beach, and Baldwin. We got a lot of resistance from those areas, and they were not going to vote for consolidation unless they were left out.
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill or Homer, but I think they voted for consolidation but voted to stay out of it.
Yes.
They thought it was a good idea, but...
As long as it did not include them.
Right. And it's still that way today, more or less. I mean, they have their own elected government and so forth.
I would expect that if those 3 cities, I don't know about Baldwin because I'm not that close to it, the beach cities have to work hard on their government. I think it would be a lot more efficient and probably more responsive to the constituents if they were included in the consolidated government now, just to eliminate those extra layers of government. It's expensive to have extra officials doing the same thing in each of those cities. If there were one city, but no, they did not want to be one city.
Well, what kind of regret, if any, do you have about things that you wish the consolidated government had been able to do?
I agree with Don, but I think that we should have had a consolidation totally. And the reason I say that is in part what Bill's talking about is law enforcement. I mean, you got an overlap and an overlay of law enforcement in the various communities. And I agree also that the sheriff should be appointed. I think our current situation is pretty representative of that fact, that being the murder capital of the state or whatever our title is now, I think we might have had a little bit better coordination if that was in effect.
What about you, Don? What would you change if you could go back and do it over?
Well, I think the idea of central services, while those portions of our government who don't like central services because they don't like having to do it and having to comply with a standard, but that is one of the basics of consolidation.
And central services, just for people who may not know, means that every department and agency doesn't go out and hire its own lawyer and do its own purchasing. It's all done by the central government for the whole government.
That's correct.
You know, one of the things that in consolidation that was our biggest problem was the employees and what you were going to do with people in the clerk office here and the clerk's office and the other government, trying to mesh those two together. And we came up with the solution that people went into a pool, and before you could hire anybody outside that pool, you had to justify why there wouldn't be somebody qualified in that pool.
Well, what were the major things that you designed to try to prevent the kind of corruption and so forth that got people aroused in the first place?
Well, I think central services was
That was one.
Yeah.
A key ingredient of that, and that was why Don's term, the third session as finance chair, was so easy.
And a strong mayor.
Strong mayor.
Form of government.
Yes.
With a good check and balance. One of the things that impressed me right away when I got here and started watching the new government was the city council auditor. The city council had the power to investigate on its own,
right,
and be a useful, meaningful check and balance on the mayor.
I don't care how the organization, whether you got triangles, circles, or squares, you got to have good people.
Yes.
And we were very lucky.
Now, how did we do that?
Well, fortuitously, at least in 1967, 1968, we had.
I think you're right.
We had Hans as mayor. We had a young, eager city council, and we had Bill Durden, who was equally as important, and we wound up with a top-notch city auditor. And so when you had that, when you had those kind of four horsemen leading the team.
And so these things you guys were pretty good. We were lucky to have you, and I would agree with that, and some of your colleagues as well. It's hard to say what Jacksonville would be like in 2008 if consolidation hadn't happened in 1968. What do you think, Homer?
Well, we've talked about this before. I think that in a lot of communities you see white flight. You see the white people move into the suburbs. The black people staying within the core area because of the ability to work in their occupation. And we might have suffered that problem, that Jacksonville would be black, that would be all black officials.
Because annexation had failed.
Yeah, and would continue to fail to me.
Don?
Well, one of the, I'm going to take off on a different tack if you don't mind. One of the big things that I was so glad to see happen was our city council, with the blessing of the mayor, and we had a great staff like Royce Lyles, city treasurer, just really some top-notch people that we had the benefit of their being in a position where they could be effective.
Bob Johnson.
And they felt as though they were a part of it. But beyond that, on our city council at least, for example, we had to rezone the city and rezone the county all into one zoning thing. The city council appointed a zoning board of voluntary citizens. And they did a tremendous job. They held hearings all over the city. They heard from everybody. They took the time to do it right. There was no political infighting. There was a lot of strong emotions, but still common sense prevailed. And it set the tone for what the city was to be. The Port Authority, for example, the area out Talleyrand and the area out around Brun Island, that area, was all set aside as port-related. It set the tone for what was going to happen, and it has happened since then.
Let's take a look at the newspaper that was published on October 1st, 1968. That's the birthday of consolidation. We'll soon be celebrating the 40th anniversary of that. And Jacksonville suddenly became, if not the biggest, one of the biggest cities geographically in the world. All of a sudden, the city limits went out to the county line, and it was a really big day, and it's kind of like trying to explain to people nowadays what an important event that was. Historically, in the Historical Society, we talk about it being important, second only to the Great Fire, and we had no control over the Great Fire, but this was something that we definitely did on our own.
Well, it had some interesting ramifications that I did not anticipate as a member of the Local Government Study Commission, but which I discovered when I got in the legislature in 1970, because we could treat ourselves as both a county and a city and take advantages of the programs that were available to one or the other, but not both. And so we got to double dip a little bit, but I think we've probably been caught up with in that regard.
You know, as far as the first council was concerned, what you were talking about, term limits, of 9 didn't run again. It was either 8 or 9.
So that was indeed the prevailing attitude
Right.
on the part of a lot of those people, that they wanted to do their thing. but not make a career.
And we have some wonderful people on the council that didn't run again. Wallace Covington was one of them.
Oh, boy.
A number of people like his caliber. And they were missed later on, I'm sure.
And successes of consolidation, what would you say if people ask you what is the accomplishments that were possible because of the new government? It seems to me that maybe somebody like business or industry comes to Jacksonville and you know you're only dealing with one government. You go to City Hall and you take care of whatever you need to take care of there. You don't have to worry about multiple overlapping jurisdictions. And so
I would think that's extremely important. Plus the fact, I think there's a lot of pride that went into the fact that we had a consolidated government. I hope it continues.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no... there were a couple of times along the way over the past 40 years when people talked seriously about maybe consolidation was a mistake or something. No one's mentioning that anymore, as far as I can tell.
I think what the citizens have seen is that this government is working. And while sometimes it may work better than at other times, it is so far from what we had before consolidation, so much better that there's no comparison at all.
And as Bill says, the key is getting good people, whether they've got a good governmental structure or not. Good people could have made the old system work, although it was really, it would have been a challenge. But I think the structure...
I think structurally this is far superior. And I think you're more likely to get good people in something that's simple enough you can manage it.
Just briefly, the old government had all kinds of archaic agencies and overlapping. You had a city council and a city commission, and a county commission, and a budget commission.
Remember, but I was on the Speakers Bureau, and I think we used to say we had something like 170-something separate entities that had to be accounted for eventually. And we suggested you could do it with far fewer.
Now, the election in August of '67 was overwhelming. It was
almost 2-to-1.
Yeah. So people really did want to change.
Well, you know,
except for the beaches, they wanted to change, but they wanted to stay out.
In the old right. In the old city, though, the city council of 9 folks used to caucus before they went out on the council floor, and they'd talk about the rezoning and how do you think we ought to do this? And when I got on old city council, I told Laverne, I said, we don't need this anymore. And Sally agreed with me, and we didn't have any more caucus.
Government in the Sunshine Bill, I think, happened about this time.
Oh, yeah, it was a brainchild of Emory Cross from Gainesville.
Yeah.
And it was in the early 60s. But there was...
What about media? I think we ought to mention briefly, we're almost out of time, but Channel 4 in particular was a crusading investigative force that led to some of this change, I think. I wasn't here at the time, so I can say that without any conflict of interest.
I don't think anyone would disagree with you, and then of course the Times Union was an ardent supporter.
Yeah.
And
Bob Fagan.
Bob Fagan.
Jack Daniel. I mean, they were in the forefront.
I do not believe we had any media opposition.
I think the media nowadays is probably a little more unafraid to get into the situation. I think back in those days, before consolidation, there were some powerful people around here in politics that kind of overshadowed others.
Well, we have to leave it there. Homer Humphreys, Don McLean, Bill Birchfield, thank you for being with us on the Jacksonville History Show. That's our show for tonight. For more information about the Jacksonville Historical Society, visit us online at jackshistory.com or call 665-0064. So long, everyone.